Yeah, well, this is a conservative estimate, this $150 billion total cost for taxpayers at the state, local, and federal level. 100 of the $150 billion is borne by state and local taxpayers. And state and local governments don't borrow from China like the federal government, and they can't print money. So it's the disproportionate burden here is on state and local governments. They either have to cut services to their citizens or they have to raise taxes. The different services that are running up the bills for taxpayers, $70 billion for education costs, that's public ed across the country at the state level. There's healthcare cost, about $12 billion total for healthcare cost. And you've got criminal justice and law enforcement, that's about $20 billion. So these costs add up at the state and local level. In Texas, we've spent $13 billion, which is about $4,500 per illegal immigrant in the state of Texas. And it is absolutely unsustainable because it's cutting into our ability to fund education for our children and to provide health care for the citizens of Texas. And then, of course, you've got the cost at the federal level, which is a set of things from public education, like $3 billion for illegal immigrant children in Head Start, or $1.5 billion to provide healthcare assistance for child delivery at hospitals. So it's all together. If you take all the $150 billion and you break it down per illegal immigrant, it's about $9,000, which, by the way, is more than we spend as a nation per veteran for military retirement benefits. It's more than we spend per Medicaid benefit for the most vulnerable Americans who need support for their health care. Well, the number of $9,000 per migrant and the $150 billion cost is based on the 22 million illegal immigrants in this country. But we've seen about 10 million illegal immigrant crossings. These are the known apprehensions, not the unknown gotaways from our mostly southern border, but also northern border. So you've got 10 million of the 22 that have come about in one administration in less than the full 4-year term. So the preponderance of cost has come from the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, to measure this at the local level, we have a guy named Brent Smith from Kinney County, Texas. He's the county attorney. It's a rural county in far west Texas. The population is 3,200. And before Biden took office, the year before, they were prosecuting 134 criminal cases a year. Today, 3.5 years later, under the Biden open border chaos, it's over 15,000 criminal cases that are being adjudicated a year at a cost of $10 million to that county of 3,200 people. So the cost is extraordinary, it's real, and it's unsustainable for counties like Kinney County. That's one of 254 counties in Texas. So you can imagine the cumulative cost and the strain it's putting on services to our fellow Americans and to citizens of states like Texas. You know, it's a good question. I don't think I'm surprised when you have the record numbers of people coming into this country. It was over 300,000 in December. It's almost 200,000 just this last month. So we're talking about thousands of people a day. And our federal government under this administration is providing shelter, food, transportation, and in some cases, many of these folks are getting on Medicaid, and so they're siphoning some of these monies that taxpayers support for vulnerable citizens in this country. For example, $6 billion of the $150 billion is for food stamps to people who are here illegally. I think probably most surprisingly is the cost of more policing, more corrections facilities, because a lot of these folks are criminal aliens. In fact, the amount of criminal aliens apprehended who were arrested and charged and convicted in the United States has gone up by hundreds of percentage points. So you have incarceration, you have the criminal justice process with more judges, and you have policing, for example, just policing, not National Guardsmen, not state troopers, up $9 billion over what we would normally fund if we didn't have an immigration crisis. I have a lot of offsets for a lot of things, mostly reversing the spending that has come about over the last 3 years, whether it's expanding the IRS by $80 billion or expanding Obamacare to people making $500,000. That's about $60 billion. There's a lot of wasteful spending in this federal government, especially over the last few years. President Biden unilaterally has spent $2 trillion from executive orders. Half of that is the student loan bailout. So there's plenty of ways to act responsibly financially and to offset the cost. But Texas and other states, they have to balance their budget, unlike the federal government. And because they can't borrow or print money, they are having to make cuts, and they're having to consider increases in taxes on their citizens. The answer to me is not the federal government paying the freight for this, although in the meantime, every state ought to be reimbursed for doing the job that the federal government under the Biden administration has abdicated to them to do. But the answer is enforce the laws. Put back in place the effective programs from the Trump administration, like Remain in Mexico. Hold sanctuary cities accountable. Stop catch and release. Work on the parole and asylum reform. I mean, we know what works. In the same year or month of last year in December, when you had over 10,000 people a day crossing our border illegally in this administration, the last month of the Trump administration was less than 1,000. So we have 1,000 on one hand, 10 times more on the other. Let's get back to the policies that work. That's the solution. Let's bring the $150 billion in cost down to nothing so that we can work to fund programs that are already on a path to insolvency, like Medicare and Social Security. Yeah, it's the principle of an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. If you spend the money necessary for a border wall and other physical barriers, technology, boots on the ground, if you spend the money to have the ICE agents and Border Patrol agents not only to patrol the border, but to do interior enforcement, which was part of the Trump administration that no longer exists in the Biden administration, then you will save money in all these social service costs because people won't come to a country where they know they'll be held accountable, will be detained for months on end, and or who will be deported because they're not here for legitimate asylum purposes. The real issue and the real heart of the problem here is policy more than it is funding. It's not so much how much we fund border security, although there's always a real cost to paying for Border Patrol agents, a wall, etc. It's that we have to detain people who need to be detained. The law says thou shalt be detained if they're here in this country illegally. We have to have this Remain in Mexico because 7 to 8 out of 10 people who have been here on asylum claims were illegitimate. But by the time they get here and are released into the interior of the country, they won't show up for their court case. So it's stopping it on the front end. Yes, it's part spending the money. There is certainly less money spent on real enforcement, than on illegal immigrants being here draining the system, a system that's already being drained and already costing us trillions of dollars in borrowed cost from foreign countries and domestic lenders alike. But the programs and using the authorities that we already have to deport people who've already had their due process and other issues like that, that's to me a no-brainer, and that's not happening. So it's part program and policy, part investing the monies necessary to secure your borders you're not paying on the back end. We would have well enough resources if we weren't spending $150 billion a year to provide the necessary immigration enforcement and border security. Well enough resources if we did. In fact, the $150 billion is almost twice as much as we spend on the Department of Homeland Security. It's more than every state except for two have in their annual budgets. So it's an extraordinary cost, and it's a cost that if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be cutting into programs for our citizens. We wouldn't be adding to the debt, and we would be providing the appropriate amount of money necessary to enforce the laws and secure the border.